We are now live on Facebook and YouTube. I welcome you all. Jeffrey Eliasov, I see you commenting, but not on the right chat. Just make sure you're on the right chat. We are now live on YouTube and Facebook, and a big warm welcome and happy Monday to one and all. Nice to have you all here with us. Thank you for joining. As you're logging on, your comments and your greetings. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. All those who are joining on Facebook and YouTube, thank you for joining us today this morning. Thank you for being part of this. I see lots of comments coming through on Facebook. Lots and lots of comments. Keep them coming. Come on, YouTubers. You got to keep on going. We got to know you're here. Let us know you're with us. We'd love to hear that. Oh, hello, all. And now I see the comments coming through. Let me greet you personally. Morning, Larry Cohen, Shirley Feldman. Thank you for those who greeted me already. Tracy Mindel, Shavuotov, Aline Yudalovitz, Helen Feinstein, Sharon Diamond, Lionel Rubin, and Hack. Norman Stein, Boker Tov, David Ginsberg, all on Facebook. Shalom Trigger, Chodesh Tov. Yes, it's a new month of Tammuz. And I see the comments coming through on YouTube. That's fantastic. Morning, Avril Walpert, Shelley Smith, Dennis Solomons, Renee Brask, and Stan Brask, Shelley Smith. There, okay. Ian Clemens, Manfred Kalmik, Janet Liebowitz. Wonderful, wonderful to see you all back online again for a wonderful morning of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. David Seif, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov. Absolutely. David, I'm happy to see that you managed to work with the links. So I'm happy to see it's working now. Good stuff. Robert Levy, thank you very much. In Hebrew, right. Well done. Robert typing in here on Facebook. Stephen Herr coming through on YouTube. Yes, asking us to learn the Ilui Nishmat in memory of Esther Bat Moshe. I also want to dedicate today's learning to Refuah Shalema for Shmuel Ben Eta Mira. May he have a complete recovery. Amen. Thank you all. Owen, sure. Good to have you online with us, Owen. Well done. Thank you very much for joining. That's a new participant coming through on YouTube. That's fantastic. Thank you. If you're just logging on, please let us know you're here. We want to know, we want to engage, we want to talk to you. Thega Sega, thank you very much. So, good morning all. Let's get going here. We're going to focus on an interesting topic today. Every day is interesting for you. But hi, Linda and Jaime. Thank you for joining. We're going to focus on, we have, just to mention, we got close to 40 people here online with us. Close to 40 people here online. So well done for all of you between Facebook and YouTube. It's great to have you here. Melissa Ganendi's yard site for her dad, Aaron Ben Hirsch. She's on YouTube. Thank you, Melissa. We have him in mind in our learning as well. David Seif. Great. Okay, good. So I'm happy you managed to fix. Fantastic. Okay, so today's topic was triggered by apologies. Today's topic was triggered by the opening verse of the parsha of this week, Parshat Korach. And we learn about Yichus. You know what Yichus means? Yichus means genealogy. What's my Yichus? Who do I come from? You know, in Yiddish, when it talks about Yichus in Yiddish, the people of old used to have a question. They used to see a youngster walking around, and then he recognized the youngster. So they used to ask in Yiddish, "Wemens bist du?" I'm sure those of you that are familiar with Yiddish would understand. "Wemens bist du?" What does that mean? It means, whose are you? Who do you belong to? So when an older member of the community would see a youngster walking around, "Wemens bist du?" I was once in New York, and I bumped into a few older members of the community, and one of them recognized me, the other one didn't, and we started talking. And the one who didn't understand, didn't know the context, or didn't know who I was, stops and says, "Wemens bist du?" So who do you belong to? So I took that to be offensive. What do you mean, who do I belong to? Ask me what my name is. I'll tell you my name. Who do I belong to? So that's going to be the discussion of today. Who are we? Are we independent individuals? Or do we belong, so to speak, to our heritage, to our genealogy, to our yichus, to our parents and grandparents? What's our identity? Wemens bist du seems to imply that the only thing I have within me is the fact that I come from my parents. I come from my grandparents. That's what Wemens bist du implies. Anyway, that Korach says as follows. Vayikach Korach, and Korach took. Who was Korach? Ben Yitzhar, son of Yitzhar. Ben Kahat, grandson of Kahat. Ben Levi, great-grandson of Levi. So we learn about the yichus of Korach. Korach had a father called Yitzhar, a grandfather called Kahat, a great-grandfather called Levi. Who was a great-great-grandfather? Who was Levi's father? Levi's father was Yaakov Avinu, right? Levi was a son of Yaakov. So how come the parasha doesn't say Ben Yaakov? How come it doesn't associate Korach to Yaakov Avinu? So Raylene Brask adds onto YouTube, my parents always identified my friends by asking who their parents are. We are now doing the same. Right, that's Wemens bist du. So who are your parents? Good point, thank you. So here in this week's parasha, we learn about Korach's parents. Who's Korach? Korach's a new kid on the block, but he's not so new after all. He comes from Yitzhar, and he comes from Kahat, and he comes from Levi, but then it doesn't say who the great-great-grandfather is. And the great-great-grandfather is Yaakov Avinu. But there's no mention of Yaakov Avinu in the parasha. For some reason, Korach is not associated to Yaakov Avinu. So Rashi picks up on this question. And Rashi says, well, why do you stop at Yaakov? Why do you stop at Levi? At least stop at Yaakov. If you don't want to go all the way back to Yitzchak and Abraham. Hi, Tamar Bloch. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. So if you don't want to go back all the way to Yitzchak and Abraham, we understand. But at least go back to the forefather, to the patriarch, to Yaakov Avinu. You would imagine, right? So what does Rashi say? Rashi said that Yaakov Avinu asked from Shamayim. He asked from heaven, and he said, please don't associate myself to Korach's rebel rousing in the community. Now, Yaakov Avinu was no longer alive, but maybe in Shamayim, Yaakov Avinu asked that his name should not be associated to Korach. Interesting. Levi is, but Yaakov Avinu isn't. Because Hashem had Rachmanis. Hashem had Rachmanis on the Zayda. And he said, why should the Zayda be associated to a rebel rouser such as Korach? We'll have Rachmanis on Yaakov Avinu, and we won't put Yaakov's name in context of the great-great-grandson Korach. However, where do we find, says Rashi, where do we find Yaakov Avinu's name is associated to his descendants? Because Yaakov's request was specifically regarding Korach. So where do we find Yaakov Avinu's request name associated? So Rashi brings that in the book of Divrei Hayamim, it speaks about the duchening of the Kohen. It speaks about the platform where the Levium would sing their songs. So that was a positive context. And there in Divrei Hayamim, Ben Avi Asaf, Ben Korach, Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi, Ben Yisrael. He's called there Yisrael, but we know that Yisrael is Yaakov Avinu. So when it comes to the positive acts and the positive deeds of the Kohanim, of the Levium, as they would sing their songs in the Beit HaMikdash in the temple, there Yaakov Avinu wanted his name to be associated. But in the parasha, this week's parasha, in Korach and the rebel rousing of Korach, there specifically Yaakov Avinu requests, don't associate me to my great-great-grandson. I don't want to be connected to the name of Korach. He doesn't deserve to have my name. I don't want my name to be connected to him. And so therefore the parasha ends at Ben Levi. Ben Levi. That's the final, that's the Zayda gets to. Hi, Felicia Jenks. Thank you for sharing your greetings on Facebook. Hilly Lipworth, thank you for sharing your greetings on YouTube. If those of you on Facebook could do me a favor and yourselves a favor, like this video and share it. I actually noticed yesterday quite a few sharings on Facebook of this video. So if I can encourage all of you to share it, that'll be fantastic. We have close to 40 people here online with us right now between Facebook and YouTube. So well done to all of you for being here and for engaging and for learning. So we're discussing genealogy. We're discussing Yichus. We're discussing Yaakov Avinu. We're discussing Korach. We're discussing positive behavior, negative behavior. So that's the question of today. The question of today is, how critical is the Yichus? How critical is the Zayda? How critical is the Zayda in the life of the grandchild? And when I say critical, does it mean, I mean positive and negative? How critical is the Zayda? How critical is Yaakov Avinu in the life of Korach or in association to Korach? How critical is our Zayda in terms of our lives? As Raylene Braz commented, and I mentioned as well, people of the older generation like to associate the children or the grandchildren by whose are you? Who are your parents? Who are your grandparents? And how critical is that? How critical is my yichus? How critical is my genealogy? How critical is my parents and my grandparents to who I am today? Good morning, Mora Dworkin. And obviously this has a question relating as well. This could be spread across to Jewish born and Jewish by conversion, right? Jewish born and Jewish by conversion. Because the Jew by conversion doesn't have the Jewish genealogy, so to speak, and that part of the influence. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's not so good. Maybe it's a challenge. Whereas the Jewish born obviously is born to Jewish parents. So the parents or the grandparents are influences in the person's life. So this is an interesting discussion as to how important is yichus. How important is the yichus, is my parents and my grandparents, to who molds me today? I once heard an analogy, and I want to invite you to share your thoughts of how important is your genealogy to you. Are you proud of your genealogy? I hope you are. But not everyone's proud of their genealogy. Not everyone's proud of who their grandparents were or great-grandparents were. It's a reality. Sometimes the older generation do not behave appropriately, maybe. And then the kids and the grandkids are not so proud. Or vice versa. Sometimes the grandkids don't behave appropriately. And then the Zaydas and Bobbas are not so proud, like Yaakov Avinu on this week's parasha. I once heard the following analogy. The analogy was that genealogy and yichus is compared to a bunch of zeros. Bunch of zeros. In other words, it means nothing on my life. The influence of my parents, the influence of my grandparents. Unless there's a 1 at the beginning of the zeros. So again, let me just repeat that. Genealogy, the yichus of my parents and my grandparents, is a bunch of zeros. Unless there's a 1 in front of those zeros. And then the more zeros you have, the bigger number it is. So in other words, just genealogy, just yichus on its own means nothing. Vemens bistu. It doesn't mean anything on its own. Right? To rely on the previous generation's influence on us on its own means nothing. If I am the number 1 at the beginning, if I make a mark, if I make a stance, if I am an individual who counts by putting a number 1 there in the line, then my number is huge. And the more zeros I have, the bigger I am and the better I am. I see Brian Owen is commenting here. Our parents' value, among everything that Brian's writing, parents' values are our foundation. Absolutely. Our parents' values is our foundation. Good. But foundations, Brian, without a house on top is pointless. Just to have a foundation with no building and no structure doesn't help. That's what I'm saying. The analogy of those zeros is so pertinent. Because Yaakov Avinu, just to be Yaakov Avinu, doesn't change Korach's life. Just because Korach's Zayda was Yaakov doesn't mean anything. It's like the guy that walks into the shul and he expects the honors. He wants to have this aliyah and this honor and this keyboard. Why? Because my Zayda was a founding member. Because my Zayda has his name inscribed on the wall in the entrance to the shul or plastered on the seat inside the synagogue, inside the shul. Is that enough of a reason? Is that fair? Because your Zayda was a founding member, what does that mean? Because your Zayda was a regular, what does that mean? Yes, sure, we associate. We understand the connection. But that on its own is not sufficient. Just to rely on the gezher or the yichus or the zeros means nothing. Unless there's a number beforehand. And as Brian Owen finishes as his point, is that parents' values are our foundation. But we have to build and make the input. Absolutely. And by doing that, we create that number 1. By doing that, we create our identity. Our identity and our mark. Exactly. So that ties into that point. Very good. We have that in the song that the Jewish people sang. The song we sang on the way out of Egypt at the splitting of the sea. We see an important verse there that illustrates this point. But before I get onto that, I want to welcome you all here on Facebook and YouTube for another session of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. If you're just logging on now, please let us know you're with us. Maybe put something in the comments, share a greeting, share a good morning, a good chodesh, whatever you want. I'd love to welcome you personally here. We have 40 people online with us right now between Facebook and YouTube joining in for today's session. It's fantastic. If you have any questions, I'd like to hear your questions. So please put them into the comments and let's engage. I'm happy to address your questions publicly. Thank you very, very much. So what does the verse tell us? It's a very, very powerful verse that the Jewish people said after the splitting of the sea. And the verse goes like this. Ze keli vehu. Elokei avi va'aromemenhu. What does that mean? It means, this is my God, and I will glorify him. Elokei avi, the God of my forefather, va'aromemenhu, and I will elevate him. Now, in this one verse, we see a reference. We see 2 parts to the verse. The first part of the verse talks about Ze keli vanvehu. This is my God, and I will glorify him, and I'll beautify him. Ze keli, it's my God. The second part of the verse speaks about Elokei avi, the God of my forefather, the God of my father. And here, we see the difference. In many instances, we rely on the fact that my father was involved, my mother was involved, my grandfather, my yichus. They were clever, they were hardworking, they were giving to the community, they were founding members. We sing their praises, right, of the Zayda and the Baba and our parents, because they were the givers. Elokei Avi, we call them Elokei Avi, the God of my forefathers, meaning that the forefathers are the source of who I am today. But is that enough? Is it enough that he's the God of my forefather? It's very nice that he's a founding member, but what does that mean for my life? How did it change Korach's life? The fact that Yaakov Avinu was so righteous, well, what happened to Korach? This rebel rouser. How did that happen? How did that happen? You know the story about the Jewish store owner of the restaurant, and in walks a religious family, and the store owner says, Al tidagu, don't worry, everything here is kosher, it's all kosher. Look at my Zayda on the wall, that's a picture of my Zayda. He was a righteous person, he was a holy person, you can trust me, I can promise you that the food is 100% kosher. And the father of the family who walks in says to the owner, my friend, if your Zayda was standing here at the table and you are up on the wall, then I'd be certain that it's kosher. But your Zayda on the wall and you're over here, I'm not so sure after all. Because Elokei Avi, the God of my forefathers, the genealogy, the yichus is good, but not if I haven't done anything about it. And that's why the opening verse of the Pasuk emphasizes the point. And this is what we start with. Ze keli v'anvehu. This is my God, and I will glorify him. My God. That comes first. Because it's got to be me. I've got to make that difference. I've got to make that mark. It's got to be me making that mark. Making that difference. Standing up to be counted. Being that number one before the many zeros. That's the keli v'anvehu. And Elokei Avi, the God of my forefathers, okay, that's the next step. Well, not the next step, but it's the zeros that come after the one. If I've got Zekeli in line, if I know that it's my God, then I can tap into Elokei Avi, the God of my forefathers. I'd like to hear from you, our viewers here today, all 40 of you, which is amazing to have you all online with us. What are your thoughts about this? How heavy do you rely on your genealogy, on your yichus, on your parents and grandparents? But what do we call relying? Do we rely and just be proud of them? Or do we rely and try to implement what they've taught us in our lives? What do you call relying on the grandparents and the parents? And the truth is, let's get on to the topic of Jewish converts who don't have the 00s after their name because their parents aren't biologically Jewish. And therefore, they won't have necessarily the parents and grandparents to guide them and show them. However, we know that Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imeinu are the parents of converts. And that's why after someone converts, we call them whatever their name was. Let's say Shimon ben Avraham. Or let's say her name is Rivka bat Sarah. Because at the end of the day, they do have zeros. So everyone's got the zeros. Everyone's got the yichus to rely on. If it's not your biological parents who aren't necessarily Jewish, then spiritually you rely on Abraham and Sarah to be your zeros after your name. But remember, it's all zeros. Unless you do something about it, means nothing. So a convert does something about it. A convert who converts has done something very active. A convert who converts has done something very proactive to convert. But what about those of us that don't convert, don't need to convert? What's our action? What are we doing to continue the legacy of our forefathers, of our patriarchs and matriarchs? Hi, Helen Feinstein. Helen Feinstein writes on Facebook, very proud of them. They set an unbelievable example. Right, there we go. But I'm sure, Helen, you're trying to also now, as a grandmother of your own, you're leading the way. You're setting a new genealogy, a new yichus for your family, to the point that your children and grandchildren can be proud of who you are and be associated to you. So just to rely on the example of your parents and grandparents isn't sufficient. You got to make sure you're making your mark. So just like the parent was a founding member of the shul, I also want to be a member of the shul. Just like my parents or grandparents had daily shiurim, I also want to have daily shiurim. They gave tzedakah, I also want to give tzedakah. They had beautiful children and grandchildren, I also want to have a family with beautiful children and grandchildren. Because I also want to live up. I want to live according to their standards and their values and what they've guided me in our lives. So thank you, Helen Feinstein, for sharing that. Being an unbelievable example. And that's the most beautiful thing. I gave an example of someone who walks to the shul and says, my grandfather here was a founding member, therefore I deserve to have A, B, and C. Really? Here's a different way of wording it. My grandfather was a founding member, therefore I want to be a member too. It's a different story. My grandfather had daily shiurim, he was a holy Jew, therefore I want to have daily shiurim also. And then the yichus influences the way we behave and the way we conduct ourselves and the way we perform. That being said, I don't want to diminish from the unbelievable example that our parents and our grandparents do have on our lives, and they mold us into who we are. And I don't want to diminish the fact that I'm proud to be associated to my parents and my grandparents. Back to Raylene's comment that people would associate the younger generation to the older generation. Yeah, we're proud of that. Sure, we're proud of that. We should be proud of that. Not always. We should be proud of that. That's true yichus. And the truth is, as I've been emphasizing over and over, both are necessary. Both the influence of the older generation with the stance and the positioning of the new generation. I see here a comment from Tracy Mindel. When our first son was born, my biggest excitement was that I could name him after my late father. He was an amazing person, a well-known lawyer, an amazing name, all of it, not just in our community. Beautiful. So that's one way of following in their footsteps, trying to walk in their footsteps. And we are very proud of our children and grandchildren and great-granddaughter, Baruch Hashem. That's right, Helen. We know that. So that's the one. Stephen Herr asked the question on YouTube, was Korach the head of the Leviim? No, Korach wasn't the head of the Leviim. He belonged to the family of Leviim, and therefore he felt that he deserves to play a role. But what role do you have to play? If you're causing trouble, you don't deserve to play any role. That's what Korach was doing. Where does Yaakov Avinu want to be associated to? Let's get back to that Rashi we started with today. Where does Yaakov Avinu want to be associated to? Yaakov Avinu, as the Zayda, as the patriarch of the family, wants to be associated to the work of the Leviim who are duchening, who are playing their music and their instruments in the Beis HaMikdash. That's where Yaakov Avinu wants to be associated. And as Rashi says in the book of Divrei Hayamim, there it says that Yaakov is the father of Yisrael, and it goes Ben Avi Yasaf, Ben Korach, Ben Yitzhak, Ben Kahas, Ben Levi, Ben Yisrael. He's associated there because a Zayda is proud to be associated to the children and grandchildren who follow in their footsteps, who follow in their ways. I saw a beautiful, beautiful clip just recently a beautiful clip where the chief of staff of the IDF did a video of this, that the chief of staff went to visit a soldier, a newly recruited soldier of the IDF. I'm not sure. I think he was overlooking Lebanon on top of the mountains. And the chief of staff went to visit him. There was the senior chief of staff, white hair. He was dressed in his uniform. And so was the young soldier, who was dark and young, newly recruited to the IDF. And they were sitting together. And they were talking about the soldier's father. And the soldier's father had been part of the same pluga, the same unit that this soldier had just joined. And that soldier's father actually died in battle. They went into Lebanon. I think it was one of the Lebanon wars. And in battle, he died. And the son was continuing on the legacy of his father. And he had been recruited to the same unit as his father had been recruited to. In fact, he said that his mother had to sign it off. His mother, because his mother lost her husband, and now her son was being recruited to the army, she now had to sign off to allow for her son to join the unit. But he tells the chief of staff, what more could I have done? The best way of living my father's life, the best way of continuing on the legacy of my father, is to join the same unit that he joined, that he was part of. Because that shows the pride that I have. I'm so proud of my father. How do you know I'm proud of my father? Because I joined his ranks. I joined his unit. And that's what I'm doing here today. And the chief of staff, who knew his father, was commending him and complimenting him and praising him and wishing him strength and safety, please God. So that's the message of today. That let's not be like Korach. Let's be like the Leviim, who remained loyal to the family, who remained loyal to Yaakov Avinu. Let's make sure that we are the number one at the beginning of the numbers. Our Zaydas and our Bobbers and our parents and our grandparents will all be the zeros. They'll add amazingly and sufficiently to the effect that we can have. But we've got to be that number one. We're going to make a mark. And Zekeli, may God be our God. And then we can rely on Elokei Avi, the fact that he's our parents and our grandparents' God too. So that's today's session for daily learning and lockdown inspiration. I hope you enjoyed being online with us throughout the morning. We'll be back here tomorrow at 10:30 tomorrow on Facebook and YouTube. 10:30 tomorrow on Facebook and YouTube. We look forward to that. In the meantime, keep safe, keep sane, and keep spiritual.